You want to make some picks on your favorite sports? Check out Underdog's Fantasy Pick'em game, where you can pick higher or lower on between 2 to 8 players and can win up to 325 times your entry by using code Niners when you sign up. And you'll get $1,000 bonus cash and a free pick.
From the alley-oops at Keysar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. And I want to talk about free agency at the cornerback position because the San Francisco 49ers are going to have to make some decisions when it comes to the cornerback position. And sometimes it's as easy enough as we'll handle it in the draft. But it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you have to do it in a couple of different methods. And I think that's what the 49ers plan to do during the offseason. They've got question marks all the way from starter to depth pieces in that cornerback room. And yeah, you've got some really good pieces to build around. You look at Deommodore Lenoir. Lenoir's fantastic. He just got the new deal. He's going to be with the 49ers for a while. Then you struck gold in the second round with Bernardo Green, and he played so well in his rookie season, it really feels like sky is the limit. But when you look at the roster after that, you've got Charvarius Ward potentially moving on. You look at the veteran guys you had playing behind that, Isaac Yedem. We're going to talk about him. He could be moving on. Rock Yassin, he could be moving on. Darrell Luter Jr. really hasn't developed into the player that people were expecting him to become. And so that's probably not an option either. And you just really don't have a lot of players as options right now. So it has to be addressed. You have to address it in free agency. You have to address it in the draft. And you need to get players that can help your football team. So the 49ers are going to look in free agency and they're going to scour. And there's already been lots of names connected to the 49ers. And usually it's players who have been here before, right? I mean, one of the most common names that I've been hearing is DJ Reed. And you throw in the fact that he has the relationship with Robert Saleh. I mean, he literally, after his time in Seattle, went to New York to play for Robert Saleh. And the fact the 49ers drafted him in the 5th round, it just makes sense the potential that he would come back. But does it make sense financially? And I think that's one of the most interesting things the 49ers have to do. They need to add a third cornerback without breaking the bank. So, yeah, a lot of people are going to tie the biggest of cornerbacks to the 49ers. What I want to do is go through, evaluate the free agent cornerbacks, which ones are going to be available, and also which ones make sense for the 49ers, where you can get a lot of bang for your buck. You need to get a player that can make an impact without potentially breaking the bank. But we're also going to look and see what happens if the 49ers decide to spend. You know, what happens if they go get a DJ Reed? What is that money going to look like? And what does that mean for Bernardo Green? Because that's the thing. If you're going to add a player that's going to play boundary corner for your football team, it potentially could affect a guy like Bernardo Green. Now, we know that Deommodore Lenoir is going to move in on nickel situations unless the 49ers get a nickel corner. But what happens if you get a big-time guy like DJ Reed? Well, I can tell you right now, in base sets, DJ Reed would be playing opposite of Deommodore Lenoir, and it would be phenomenal. Those two guys are very good. They're very aggressive. They would help you when it comes to stopping the run. They're very physical with wide receivers. They play with a certain mindset. It works. What that means is Bernardo Green in year 2 becomes a guy that comes in on nickel snaps. Well, he probably plays about 70% of snaps, which is still hugely significant. And he'll play the boundary corner, and Deommodore Lenoir will go inside. But it will affect how much. Do you want him to play 100% of the snaps? That's one of the things you got to decide. So if you feel like getting one of these cornerbacks strengthens your secondary to that point, then yeah, you go get one of those guys. So that's why we're going to examine all avenues. High-priced, cheap, bargain basement. We're going to go through it all. We're going to figure out which cornerbacks make sense for the 49ers. We're going to also kind of eliminate a few guys as well, because there's going to be guys brought up amongst this group of people. And a lot of these guys have built through, hey, someone's messaged me about a player. They've said, hey, what about this guy? What about that guy? And so I kind of want to just put out a video and just discuss, hey, yeah, this guy's a real option, or yeah, this guy doesn't fit the system, or he hasn't really been playing that good. Because sometimes guys are getting by on name recognition alone. So this is going to be a fun one. If you have a cornerback that you think makes a lot of sense for the 49ers, leave it in the comment section. And if I don't address it, definitely leave it in the comment section because I'd love to, approach it. I can't talk about all cornerbacks in one episode, but I definitely would like to. So please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening to audio platform 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you are going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL and UFC, Bet Online continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every three-pointer and hat trick, Bet Online has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. And so you got an interesting dynamic because you signed Charvarius Ward a few years ago, and he was your number one corner throughout that process. Now, along the way, you drafted a really good player in Deommodore Lenoir, and he really asserted himself as a top-flight cornerback in this league. The versatility to play inside and out is one of the best in the NFL. I don't know how many players are able to be a significant nickel while also being a tremendous boundary corner and playing all those snaps, and he does it seamlessly. When that contract got signed, it looked like Charvarius Ward was probably out the door. And Charvarius Ward is probably still going to command a pretty good penny on the open market. Now, some people are still saying, hey, we need to bring back Charvarius Ward, even though Ward has kind of expressed he might want to move on for personal reasons, less to do with the organization or the football team, but more to do with his own personal life. And I think that's something to take into account. But I thought we needed to start with Charvarius Ward. Now, he is, according to Spotrac, looking at his market value, a 3-year, $45 million deal, almost 3 years, $46 million, about $15.3 million per year, which isn't crazy, right? But that's less than Deommodore Lenoir is getting from the 49ers. I don't think that Charvarius Ward is going to take less money than Deommodore Lenoir is making to come back to San Francisco. I also don't think the 49ers are going to pay, 15 or 16 million to Charvarius Ward and have two high-priced cornerbacks when you just can't afford it. And so I think that's what makes it a little bit interesting when we're talking about some of the guys that are going to be potentially available for the 49ers. So I don't think Charvarius Ward comes back. So I wanted to start with that. I think that the personal reasons, number one, I think financially it doesn't make a lot of sense for the 49ers, even though Charvarius Ward is one of my favorite 49ers. I loved having him here. He was a really good player and a really good person. And so him moving on definitely isn't my favorite thing. But it kind of comes with the territory. I'll be rooting for Charvarius Ward wherever he goes, unless he goes to one of the 49ers rivals. And then in that case, it's going to be a little bit tougher. But I'm hoping he goes to the AFC and he goes to, a team where he can feel comfortable and move on because I think he deserves it. Now, some of the guys that were a little bit cheaper for the 49ers, you got a guy like Isaac Yedem and Rock Yassin. I think one of those guys could come back. I think there's a potential Yedem finds another opportunity out there where he could land and potentially get more snaps. But the 49ers might bring him back to compete. He is a good special teams player. So we could see a cheap contract for Isaac Yedem or a cheap contract for Rock Yassin. I think both of those guys would be welcome back. I think Isaac Yedem probably a little bit more than Yassin. I think they liked him overall a little bit better. But I don't think Isaac Yedem performed to the level that the San Francisco 49ers were hoping. Not to the level that I was hoping. After watching what he did in New Orleans the year before, I thought Isaac Yedem was a surefire stud for the 49ers. He had played for Brandon Staley in Denver. He had that connection, and I just thought that he was going to be able to translate well. It really wasn't a great transition for Yedem, but it wasn't terrible either. And as it comes to depth, cornerback 3, 4, it's not terrible. I'd love to improve cornerback 3, but if Yedem, you told me, was going to compete as cornerback 3 and potentially play, as cornerback 4, I think that's a really good situation. Rock Yassin, kind of the same thing. The other guy that is a potential to come back, and I think he might, is Nick McLeod. The 49ers picked him up during the season. He came from the New York Giants, and he played a lot of nickel. And they actually started him at nickel for some of the games when they had injuries at cornerback. And I think the Niners are high enough on him that potentially could come back. But we do have a new sheriff in town. And so that means Robert Saleh and Gus Bradley are going to potentially sign off on these guys. Where before it was Brandon Staley and Nick Sorensen, a different mindset when it comes to a cornerback, which could change the evaluation process and who they feel fits their scheme. But I think because he's young, there's still an opportunity potentially for Nick McLeod to come back at a very cheap contract. He will help you on special teams. But I think he could be likely to, potentially come back. I wouldn't be shocked if he leaves either. But I just want to put in a category that I don't think you're going to get Yedem, Yassine, and McLeod come back. Maybe one or two of those guys, if you're not really having success, finding other guys. These guys could make a lot of sense. But let's get into the big dogs. Let's talk about, everyone now that we've kind of set the table for who could come back. And I think the 49ers can afford probably one of these guys, but we'll see. Now, we talked about DJ Reed earlier, and I wanted to go over what his market value looks like according to Spotrac, because, DJ Reed's a good player. He's been around the league for 7 years now. Out of Kansas State, he was a 49ers draft pick. And I think I said 5th round earlier. He's listed as a 4th round on here because he was a comp pick 142 and naturally thought that was a 5th round pick, which it normally is. But it wasn't. But when you look at his market value, you're talking about a guy that is expected to make $14.7 million per season. In fact, they've got his contract being 4 years, $58.6 million. That's crazy. And so that's a lot of money for the cornerback. His current contractor's average salary before was $11 million. So it's, close to a, $3.5 million upgrade. And it would take him from being the 18th highest paid cornerback to being the 12th highest paid cornerback. So just out of the top 10, as far as salaries for a cornerback, can the 49ers afford to pay Deommodore Lenoir, the $18 million per year, and then pay another, close to $15 million, for Reed? I don't know. I think that is one of those things where would you rather just have Charvarius Ward back? You're basically paying him the same amount of money. So this is why I'm not sure that it makes a lot of sense to bring back DJ Reed at this amount. Yes, he would be phenomenal. You put him, like I said, opposite Deommodore Lenoir, you got some dogs in the secondary. And I think those guys would compete at a high level. We know Robert Saleh knows them really well. It makes a lot of sense. I just think that the salary, the way it is, if it comes out to a 14.7 for his annual salary, I think that's just a little bit too rich. And I think he is in a position where he's going to want another good contract. He's not ring chasing. And so that could be a real problem for the 49ers. I don't know if DJ Reed makes sense. And I've seen a lot of people putting it on, their board like, hey, this is something the 49ers have to do. But I'm not sure that they have to pay that much at cornerback. I think when you're talking about a cornerback 3, you might want to maybe go a little bit cheaper. Try to find some production with somebody else. And I know it's tremendously important to find somebody that can cover on the back end. But with the draft class that you're going to have, potentially you can hit a cornerback there that could come and compete. You could go with a cheaper option like Isaac Yedem, that's for sure. And yeah, I don't think Yedem is who I'd want to be cornerback 3 either. But we're going to go through some guys right now that, are probably a little bit of a different option. And the next guy, I think he's probably the best option as far as what I think the 49ers should possibly be going for when it comes to the cornerback position. And I don't know how people are going to feel about it because he's a guy coming off an injury. But I am a huge fan of Paulson Adebo. And so if you've been on the channel for a long time, you know that when Paulson Adebo was coming out in the draft, I believe the 49ers were targeting Paulson Adebo in the 2nd round, that they wanted him. In fact, it's the draft where the 49ers end up with Aaron Banks. And thanks so much for the new subscription. I really appreciate it. And, this is the one time that John Lynch mentions it in a presser that they were targeting Paulson Adebo. So it was one of those times when I was hot on it and I was actually right. And Adebo goes to New Orleans, and New Orleans jumped up in front of the 49ers and took him. And I think it really messed up the 49ers, what they were looking for when it came to a cornerback. And now Adebo's hitting the free agent market. And yes, he's coming off an injury. And that's never something you want. But what it could do is drive down the price. And if they're still high on Paulson Adebo, it would make a lot of sense. Now, Adebo is still a guy that is looked at pretty highly around the league. He is a guy that played 7 games last year. In those 7 games, he was playing all the snaps. He had 52 tackles in 7 games and 3 interceptions. The year before, he played in 15 games and he had 4 interceptions. He had 2 forced fumbles. I mean, he's a guy that's around the ball and make plays. So he had 2022 was his down year where he had 0 interceptions. Other than that, every single year he's had at least 3 interceptions. He's a playmaker. He's got good size and good length. He's a guy that I think the 49ers should be interested in. And, I think, and I misspoke earlier, it was the 3rd round that he got jumped up and snagged, not the 2nd round. And so when looking at his market value, he is cheaper than DJ Reed. And DJ Reed, like I said, great player. But you're talking about a difference in around $4 million between DJ Reed and Paulson Adebo. Adebo is also a little bit younger than DJ Reed. He's a little bit longer and taller, fits the system that Robert Saleh wants to run a little bit more, that the cover 3, he fits the mold with his height and weight. So you're talking a market value of 2 years, $22 million, which I believe is a little bit more doable. Now, you have to worry about the injury concerns, and the medical would have to check out because he did have a significant injury that, he was only allowed to play 7 games. But that was the first time he, missed that many games. It's not like he's been a consistent injury-prone player. He's in the backyard out of Palo Alto at Stanford. He's a guy that they've been high on. I'm sure they've been following him the entire time. I think Paulson Adebo is a huge target for the 49ers. And I think if you could get him for, 2 years, $20 million, you do it. And, you go ahead and you spread out that money a little bit. But you're talking about a guy that now, he comes in and he plays the boundary corner opposite De'Amari Lenore. And then on nickel situations, Bernardo Green comes in and he plays boundary and De'Amari Lenore moves inside. But you're going to get a playmaker, a guy that can make plays, a bona fide stud on the outside. And that's what you need to find. And so Paulson Adebo, I think, is a huge target for the 49ers. I think he would be great. I think he fits exactly, what they're looking for. I think the one concern is the medical. And they're going to have a clear picture on what that medical is. The good thing is he was injured early enough in the season that he'll be ready to go and healthy. But this is a 49er guy. This guy meets all the requirements. The only thing is the injury, the question mark there. And that's going to scare a lot of people away. I get it. And so maybe it will. Maybe that'll scare the 49ers away. And if it happens, well, that's, something they have to do. They have to make sure that they're staying safe. But it would be a tremendous upgrade over the guys you had last year. Isaac Yedem, Rock Yassin. It's so much better. This is a starting caliber corner out on the outside that is an absolute ball hawk. And we need turnovers. We need guys that can make plays in the secondary. And I think Paulson Adebo would do a very good job if he was the guy there. Now, let's talk about an older player. Guy that is definitely ring chasing. And last year had to wait basically until the season was about to start. And I think that probably, he's been a guy we've talked about pretty much every year. I think in San Francisco, as people have looked at, potentially bringing him in. And I think he's still playing at a pretty high level. When you look at what he was doing last year in Minnesota, and that is Stephon Gilmore. And I know Gilmore might retire. There's been some conversation about that. He did play in 15 games last year, logged over 800 snaps, which is down from the previous 2 years where he logged over 1,000 in each year. Only had 1 interception, which, he used to be a guy that made a lot of plays on the football. And it was a down year, but he played, pretty well overall when you're talking about playing in Minnesota. But he's been in the league for 13 years. He is ring chasing. And guess what, guys? His market value is extremely low. And so this is a guy that, hey, you strike out on your guys you want to get. You don't get DJ Reed. You don't get Paulson Adebo. You don't get some of these guys that we're going to talk about. And you look up and all of a sudden Stephon Gilmore might be enticing. And you could go to him and say, hey, come in. I know he's a veteran who likes to compete, but maybe he would be down for playing 70% of the snaps. And, you say, hey, come in on nickel situations, play the outside corner like you do. That's when Lenore comes in, and that could probably elongate his career a little bit. but give him an opportunity to win a Super Bowl. Is he still doing it at the level that he used to do in 2019 or even 2020, for instance? No, he's not. He's not that guy that was a stud that was getting 6 interceptions in the season. But what he is a talented cornerback who still got really good eyes and the ability to play on the outside. And you're still going to draft somebody. You're still going to get guys to compete. So he would be more of a bridge corner. But it would be a huge upgrade over the guys we've talked about when you're talking about Yedem, Rock Yassin, Darrell Luter Jr. You need somebody for 1 year to ring chase. It's not the worst idea, especially with the amount of money he's probably going to get. 5.3 million. That's dirt cheap for a third corner. And I think that's part of the way the 49ers have to build their team this year. They have to be very strategic with how they go about it. And getting a veteran that can help in the secondary is huge. And if you're going ring chasing, these are the kind of guys that you can hit on. Would I prefer Paulson Adebo or DJ Reed over Stephon Gilmore? Absolutely. But I think when you look in the grand scheme, it's, hey, if I miss out on these guys because I can't afford them, well, here's a guy that's a little bit more bargain basement you could potentially get that could help your football team. So I like the idea of Stephon Gilmore if you miss out. I mean, last year it was all the way until, the season almost started. Then he came in and played for Minnesota. So something similar. Hey, you get through free agency. It's not really working out. And, maybe you don't want to go into the draft, having to draft a corner high. And so you say, you know what, let's bring in Stephon Gilmore and we'll still draft a corner. But that'll kind of ensure that we have a third corner we know we can count on in some of these big games with these teams that are coming out with, 3 receiver sets that really, really work. And that's one of the tough things, about building a roster is sometimes you have to give a little bit, and that makes it tough. And if you guys want to do Underdog Fantasy right now, sign up, use the promo code Niners. There's a link in the description. Download the app, and you sign up, and you can get up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick playing the higher lower game. They're doing all kinds of cool stuff with streaks when it comes to NBA and NHL. So guys, go out and download the app, use the promo code Niners, get $1,000 in free bonus cash and a free pick by using the code Niners. So Underdog Fantasy available for you if you would like to partake, and it helps me out. And so if you want to do that, that's great. Now let's talk about a guy that I'm a fan of, and he had a really good year with the Chargers this season, and that's Kristian Fulton. And so Kristian Fulton, played about 760 snaps, and he did well in those snaps, over a 71 grade according to PFF. And so this would be a target that's a little bit cheaper, but can also make some plays in the secondary. You're talking about a guy who had a run defense grade of 79.3. That is 22nd best amongst cornerbacks. His coverage grade is 67.9, which is 62nd. But you're talking about a third corner for your potential football team. So when you're looking at that, that's when you're deciding like, hey, potentially, this makes sense. He's been in the league for 5 years. He's almost 27 years old, and he's going to be pretty cheap. And so you're potentially moving on from Yedem and Rock Yassin, and why not get a guy like Kristian Fulton, who's still young, comes out of Louisiana State, a former second-round pick in 2020, but you're talking a 2-year deal worth $6.8 million. Cheap for a young guy. And yeah, I get it. This isn't a guy that's a starting caliber boundary corner, but this is a guy that can come in on those 70% of snaps, and you can use him and utilize his skills, and he's still cheap. Played in a really good defense last year with the Los Angeles Chargers. And so I like Kristian Fulton as potentially a cheap option for the 49ers, a guy that you feel like you could probably get a little bit more out of. Kristian Fulton makes a lot of sense for the 49ers potentially. He's 5'11", 197 pounds. He fits the bill on what they normally go for. And, that's important. You're talking about a guy who had, 42 tackles and interception. And, he allowed 40 catches last year, but that's still the top 50 in the NFL. So, he's a guy who played consistently. He played well. He graded out to be the 40th best cornerback out of 223 that were graded. So, as a third cornerback, that's exactly what you're looking for. Potentially, Kristian Fulton would make a lot of sense for the 49ers if you're going bargain basement. And that's what the decision is, right? Are you going high? Are you going DJ Reed? You going those guys that are really expensive? Are you going intermediate with the Paulson Adebo? Are you going cheap, a veteran, a guy chasing like, potentially Stephon Gilmore, or maybe a guy that's still young that you could potentially go with Christian Fulton. It's something there. Now, a name that got brought up to me, so I wanted to at least talk about him, but I don't see it, is Emmanuel Mosley. There's just been so many injuries with Emmanuel Mosley, whether it was in San Francisco or Detroit. I just don't think the 49ers are going to go down that road, but it was brought up to me, so I wanted to make sure I addressed it, and I don't think it's a possibility. I love E-Man. That the E-Man that we had in 2019, 2020, the dude was a beast. And so you always have, your heart goes out to him and you hope that he can make big time plays, but I just don't think Emmanuel Mosley fits in for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, another potential guy out there, and this is interesting because a lot of people are going to bring up just how important he was as far as the draft process a while back. And he's got a name that's going to be familiar with everyone, and that's Asante Samuel Jr. And I remember that draft, and I remember it vividly because everyone was I was live, and everyone was saying, hey, we need to take Asante Samuel Jr. We need to take Asante Samuel Jr., and they did not. And Asante Samuel Jr. is a guy that didn't have a good season last year. Didn't at all. There was a lot of Chargers players that played really well. He wasn't one of those guys that had a good season. He struggled. Yet his market value, he's 25 years old, is still extremely high. They have him 4 years, $45 million, close to $11.5 million per year. To me, this is too rich. I would rather have Paulson Adebo, a guy that can play boundary corner, instead of paying, Asante Samuel, who you are more likely put into the nickel. And so I know he plays outside sometimes. I know he plays on the outside. He can play on the inside. He's got versatility. I just think that this is a little too rich. And I wasn't expecting with the season that he had last year for his market value to be this high, according to Spotrac. I expected it to be a lot cheaper. And so that kind of took him out of the running. But I knew there was going to be a lot of conversation around Asante Samuel because during that draft process, people were very high on Asante Samuel to the 49ers. I mean, so high. And so there's always a chance the 49ers would be interested. I just think this is a little too expensive for a guy that's potentially going to be a nickel corner in San Francisco. I think on a lot of teams he could still play boundary, but I think with the 49ers he would be a nickel. And so I think he's too expensive. So I've kind of written him off. You guys don't have to write him off, though. If he's somebody that you like or that you're interested in, I completely understand that. But to me, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to bring in Asante Samuel. It just, I'm not there. I think there's other options the 49ers could potentially go with, to me, that just make a little bit more sense. And so that's kind of where I would go. Now, another name that's popped up last year, and it's been kind of hovering around the 49ers a little bit, former USC product, but it was also a part of a potential trade at the trade deadline last year before. Lots of conversation about Adoree Jackson or Adoree Jackson, and he's a guy that's almost 30 years old, can still cover at a high level. I think he's a perfect example of a third corner guy that's extremely fast. I think he would fit what the 49ers want to do. So to me, Adoree Jackson is interesting. Now, Spotrac has not done a market value for Adoree Jackson. He would be going into year 9. So that's something I'll wait to see. But when you're looking at his production, he didn't play a whole lot last year. He kind of, the amount he played has changed. He only played 400 snaps last year. He only started 5 games. So I think he's going to be pretty cheap. And I think there's an opportunity to go out there and potentially get him. He hasn't been extremely productive. So this would be another potential veteran bargain basement type deal. Maybe you're getting him for $6.5, $7 million, maybe even cheaper. We'll see, depending on what they end up putting out there. But I think he's a guy you could strike and get a little bit cheap. He's a veteran, so he's seen a lot of football. Is he your number 1 target? No. Is he number 5 target? Probably not. But when you're talking about, Adoree Jackson or Rock Yassin, Adoree Jackson, Isaac Gedem, Adoree Jackson. So I think that's something to remember. When you're looking at these guys, is you're trying to find guys that fit in every avenue, because you might have to, skimp a little bit, potentially, on a guy. Now, one guy I brought him. I want to bring him up because I think he has the versatility to play safety too. And in fact, I would probably, if the 49ers wanted to, it might be a guy to go to potentially play free safety. I think he has that kind of versatility. Originally drafted by Tennessee, last year played for the Los Angeles Chargers, and that's Elijah Molden. And Elijah Molden last year had a tremendous season for the Chargers. He had 3 interceptions, and now he hits free agency, and his market value is extremely cheap. So the reason I said he could play safety is he's a guy that's so smart. The evaluation process, this dude is just, he understands football. He understands route concepts. He can play nickel. But I think he's a lot like Tyrann Mathieu, where he could play free safety as well. He did, play some safety with the Chargers. So I like him for potential cornerback or safety. I think he could play nickel for the 49ers, or I think he could play safety. And at a price tag of $6.2 million per year, he's exactly what you're looking for potentially in both categories. And he's a good player. So yeah, I'm interested potentially in, Elijah Molden, if that was somebody, the 49ers could go with. We'll see. We'll see if they do show interest in him. Now, one last guy is another guy that's 28 years old, but he played in a familiar system for the 49ers, playing for Raheem Morris with the Atlanta Falcons, and that's Mike Hughes. He's 5'10", 189 pounds, and he had a 71.9 overall grade according to PFF last year. Didn't play a tremendous amount of snaps, but he played good against the run, 68.2. Not great, but good. His coverage grade was 71.4, which is better, 42nd. So you're talking about third corner, right? Makes a lot of sense there. So he's a guy also on the back end that you could get potentially pretty cheap, and you are looking for guys that are cheap on the back end. And so you start breaking it down, you start finding guys, potentially that you can squeeze into that third cornerback role. So it depends how good you want that cornerback to be. And I think that's one of the questions. Now, I will say, if I was looking at the list overall and the guys that we've talked about, my number one target, and this would all be dependent on injury, would be Paulson Adebo. I think how young he is, his potential, his ball hawking ability, his size, it fits perfectly with Robert Saleh's defense. He would be the number one target in my eyes for what the 49ers are looking for and what I think John Lynch will look for. But the injury will be the determining factor. If they're worried about injury concerns, he will be scratched from this list, and that's fine. I just don't have access to medical, so I have no idea. He would be number one. I do think after that, number two, depending on what you're willing to pay. Here we go, high price guy, you're thinking DJ Reed. I think he would be the number two guy if you're willing to pay that amount. I don't think they are, so I don't think he's a distinct possibility in free agency the way that some other people do. So I would go the next available option, I think, would be a guy like Christian Fulton, a cheap guy who showed a lot of ability, played really well for the Chargers last year. You bring him in to play the third corner. I think that makes sense. And then after that is when I kind of turn my attention to the veterans. And I'm thinking Stephon Gilmore, if nothing works out, or Adoree Jackson, those two guys. So it's an interesting market. And I think the 49ers are going to hit on one of these guys, not more than one. Maybe a couple cheap guys, right? You hit a decent corner, midway, a guy like Paulson Adebo for $11 million. Maybe you sign another guy like Isaac Yedem for the league minimum, and then you draft somebody. I think that's a potential 49ers could do. But the likelihood is if you go DJ Reed, you're not signing anyone else. You spend a lot of money there. And I think the 49ers need to spend money when it comes to defensive tackle, potentially edge rush, maybe even safety. So this is kind of the list. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Are you scared to sign a guy like Paulson Adebo, or do you like that idea? Would you sign DJ Reed? I'm curious. Let me know if any of these guys kind of got you interested in the 49ers, potentially getting a third cornerback, or even in some cases a second, making Renardo Green the third. I'm really curious what you think. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Listening audio platform 49ers Cutback on Believe Network. Please give it a 5-star rating. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers.